Well, welcome to Moments That Matter. I'm Stanley Kelly, pastor of Fellowship Baptist Church here, with the infamous or famous, one of the two, the master Curtis Harmon. And Curtis, we're here back in 1 John chapter 2 and ready to dive in. Curtis, I've enjoyed our journey thus far through this book. This is optimal. I mean, this is great stuff. We could say that. We could be anywhere in the Bible, really, and say that, but this is such practical teaching that John has given to us, and just, we could use it on every level of Christian living. So I'm loving this. Curtis, we're going to jump back in today, 1 John chapter 2, and read verse 7 and 8. And the title of today's little devotional thought is A New Old Commandment, which could seem a little muddy, a little unclear, but I think it'll kind of clear up for us as we work through these two verses. So let's read them together. The Bible says, "Brethren, I write no new commandment unto you, but an old commandment which ye had from the beginning. The old commandment is the word which ye have heard from the beginning. Again, a new commandment I write unto you," which is crazy phraseology.
Which is it?
Yeah. Because, he started verse number 7 off. He says, "I'm not writing anything new. I'm giving you something old." Now verse number 8, he sounds like a Baptist preacher, doesn't he? Now verse number 8, "Again, a new commandment I write unto you, which thing is true in him and in you, because the darkness is past and the true light now shineth." That is awesome phraseology there. Well, Curtis, verse number 7, we just start off here. Of course, John is still speaking as he is through the entire epistle to believers. And so he refers to them as brethren. And he says, "I write no new commandment unto you, but an old commandment which ye have had from the beginning. The old commandment is the word which ye have heard from the beginning." And so, Curtis, verse number 7, John is just simply trying to capture the fact that the subject he is now addressing isn't an entirely new subject. This is something, the word beginning is used twice there in verse number 7. And he's taken us all the way back to the beginning, to where this thing started off. We could go all the way back to the book of Genesis. And the subject content that John has in his mind is something that has just always been around. There is nothing new. And Kirsten, I read this earlier today. The first thing that I thought about was Solomon's words, "There's nothing new under the sun." And especially when we're dealing with this subject here that John is fixing to dive into, there's nothing new here. This is an old commandment, right?
Yeah, and just to call back to chapter 1 of 1 John, he gave us the subject of this epistle, Jesus Christ, but you pointed out back then when we were in those sessions the word "that," but the way this epistle starts out, he says, "That which was from the beginning, which we have heard."
Yeah.
And he goes on to say, "Which we have seen with our eyes," and all that. And then in verse 3, "That which we have seen and heard." And again, verse 5, "This then is the message which we have heard of him." So he likes that word.
Yeah.
Logos or logos.
Yeah. And what we've heard.
He's showing us, he did it in John chapter 1, his gospel record, but even here in chapter 2, where he says, it's an old commandment. The old commandment is the word you heard from the beginning.
Yeah. So this is predating the life and ministry of Christ. I want to be careful. This isn't predating Christ,
right?
But this is predating the incarnation of God in the person of Jesus Christ. When he's saying what we're about to talk about isn't new. And for us, we're 2,000 years removed from this. But as John is writing this is kind of hot off the press. John is the last living apostle as he's writing this epistle. But still, he's saying this is nothing new in the sense that Jesus isn't telling us something that we haven't already understood, should be a part of our lives as believers. But then he moves into verse number 8. "Again, a new commandment I write unto you," which is where the craziness kind of comes in at. And I think what that really highlights for us is it's not new in the sense of the subject, but in the sense of its nature and how it's carried out and to what degree it's carried out is there's a freshness or a newness to it. And so he says again, a new commandment I write unto you, which thing is true in him. And there is exactly what you're saying. That takes us back to the main subject of really all the Bible. We could say for 1 John, but really all the Bible, the him there would be Jesus Christ. And so he says, this commandment that I'm writing to you about is new, which thing is true in him. The newness of the old command is brought out only in the person of Jesus Christ. This thing is true in him, and because it's true in him, it's true in you, because Christ is in you, the hope of glory. And so this is something new inside of us. And then I think he really just kind of puts the cap on it here at the end of verse number 8, because the darkness is past and the true light now shineth. And Curtis, that's a reference to the old covenant versus the new covenant. The old dispensation versus the new dispensation. And the old would be typified here by darkness. And darkness in the sense of there is no full revelation. There is no complete comprehension. There's a lot of, unclarity that's a part of the Old Testament. You think if you just had an Old Testament as Orthodox Jews and you have no New Testament revelation, can you get a lot from the Old Testament? Sure. But there's also a lot of question marks, and you could see where even the Jews of Christ's day may not be as on point theologically as we would have hoped for them to be, because you and I have the complete revelation. We have 27 additional books in the New Testament that are enlightening us to the things that were written aforetime for our admonition and learning. And so he's just simply saying that time period of oldness and almost ignorance is past, and the true light now shineth. And the true light again would be connected to the person of Christ. Yeah.
So when he connects that to the person of Christ, and remembering that he used the analogy of light versus darkness so much throughout the Gospel of John, and even here, think about his readers and how much that would mean to them.
Yeah.
And I guess, do you think that they would connect that immediately to the Old Testament? When they think about the new covenant, like you said, and they think about Jesus being the true light and all these light versus darkness analogies, when John's teaching that way, would his readers immediately connect that to the Old Testament?
Yeah. I think there's no doubt about it. You think about the preaching that is recorded for us taking place inside of the Bible, and there is always this element of comparing the old to the new. And of course, throughout, Hebrews, which is sermonic in and of itself. But even the preaching of Peter, the preaching of Stephen, those recorded messages that we have, it's them showing this was Old Testament, but here's what God was setting up, and here's the fullness. And even John himself is going to bring out in his gospel record that Jesus Christ is the fullness of grace and truth. And the fullness of truth there, Curtis, is that he is the full revelation of everything that God intends for us to have. Well, I just mentioned Hebrews. I was thinking about Hebrews chapter 1, God, who at sundry times and in diverse manners spake in times past unto the fathers by the prophets, hath in these last days spoken unto us in his Son. And the comparison there is there's a lot of different ways and different times God spoke back then, but it was all incomplete revelation. But with Jesus Christ, it is complete. It is full revelation. And I don't think there's any doubt that the readers here would have immediately recognized what John was doing. And honestly, there's like a sigh of relief, that's bleeding through this that would be anticipated from his readers of saying, oh yeah, it's like saying, thank God we are in the new covenant. That's exactly, all the promises, the anticipation, the expectation that started all the way back in Genesis 3 for the Redeemer. And, 4,000 years of successive history And now he's come, and we have him, and our hands have handled. We've seen him, we've heard him, we've touched him, and he's been here. He's accomplished every single promise that needed to be fulfilled.
There's no New Testament without Christ.
No,
No new covenant. And in verse 8, there's no new commandment until that true light. Jonathan, he already identified Christ as the true light.
Yeah.
There's none of that without Christ.
Well, I'll give you one better than that. There's really no old covenant without Christ. Romans 3, Paul's going to show that even the sins that were past were first atoned for by the sacrifice of Christ. His sacrifice reaches back and covers all the Old Testament believers. My preacher used to say that Old Testament saints were saved on credit. I don't know how theologically sound it is to say that, but there's an essence where it's true that they're not saved only because of their faith. They're not saved, based off from a sacrificial system. They're saved because they have trusted in God, who is going to bring about the payment for sin, that the seed of the woman is going to bruise the head of the serpent. And that's exactly what Jesus Christ does on the cross. And so we have a perfect salvation. Well, obviously here, and we're not going to have time to jump into this. We'll pick it up in our next session this week. But the old commandment, the new commandment, obviously is dealing with us loving the brethren, our relationship to fellow believers, that we are to live, not just putting up with each other, but we are to live loving one another to the extent that if we don't love one another, we should not have confidence that we are really saved individuals. That's strong language.
Especially since he's dealing with confidence, right?
Sure, yeah.
And in this epistle, this book here, he's dealing with assurance.
Yeah.
And he's telling us he's already made some bold statements about how to know or how to not know. And if you say this, he that saith, and he's going to go forward here and teach us about loving each other and give us concrete evidence that we're believers.
Yeah. And point number one is if you don't love the brethren, you're not saved.
You're in darkness.
Yeah. There's something majorly wrong with your supposed faith. Yeah. Well, thank you for tuning in today to Moments That Matter. And we look forward to seeing you in our next session.